It's 822 AD. In the royal city of Copán, in what is now western Honduras, a stonemason sets down his chisel. The altar he's been carving, meant to commemorate the coronation of the city's new king, Ukit Took, is only half finished. The glyphs stop mid-sentence. The stone is left exactly where it sits. No one ever picks it up again. Within a generation, Copán's population of over 20,000 people will be gone. Not killed. Not buried in mass graves. Simply absent. And here's the question that no archaeologist has fully answered in 200 years of excavation: where did they go, and why did they leave so suddenly that they didn't finish the king's own monument? To understand what collapsed, you first need to understand what existed. By 800 AD, the Maya were not a primitive people scratching at jungle soil. They ran one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Their cities, Tikal, Palenque, Copán, Caracol, housed tens of thousands of people. They had a written language complex enough that we're still decoding it. They tracked celestial bodies with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another 6 centuries. Their agricultural systems fed millions across the lowlands of present-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. And then, over the course of roughly 100 years, 800 to 900 AD, almost all of it stops. Stele carving, the Maya practice of recording significant dates in stone, ceases almost universally. Construction of monumental architecture halts. Royal courts dissolve. In the records I've kept of civilizational collapses across the ancient world, few are as complete, as geographically widespread, or as poorly explained as this one. But here's where the official story starts to crack. For most of the 20th century, historians settled on a comfortable explanation: drought. And the drought was real. Lake sediment cores extracted from Lake Chichancanab in the Yucatan Peninsula show isotopic signatures consistent with severe, prolonged dry periods between 800 and 1000 AD. Some paleoclimatologists estimate rainfall dropped by as much as 40% in certain lowland regions. Crops failed. Reservoirs dried. Populations, already straining against the limits of their agricultural systems, began to collapse under famine. It's a clean story. A satisfying one. But the next page of the record is darker and far more complicated. Because here's what the drought theory doesn't explain. The northern Maya cities, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Coba, survived. They flourished, in fact, through the same centuries when the southern lowland cities were collapsing. If drought killed the classic Maya, why did it only kill half of them? The climate affected the entire peninsula. But the collapse was not uniform. Then there's the population data. When archaeologist Marcello Canuto and his team used LIDAR, laser mapping technology, to survey the Guatemalan jungle in 2018, they found something that rewrote the scale of what we thought existed. Hidden beneath the forest canopy were the outlines of over 60,000 previously undetected structures, homes, raised fields, defensive walls, causeways. The Maya lowlands, it turns out, supported somewhere between 7 and 11 million people at the civilization's peak. That's not a population you lose to drought alone. This is where the official story falls apart. 3 records I'll walk you through in the next 2 minutes overturn the comfortable narrative, and the third one was suppressed in academic circles for nearly 6 decades for reasons that still aren't entirely clear. The first is the warfare evidence. Epigraphers, scholars who study Maya inscriptions, have now confirmed that the late Classic period, roughly 700 to 900 AD, saw an unprecedented escalation in warfare between city-states. David Stuart's translations of inscriptions from multiple sites document kings capturing and ritually sacrificing rival rulers with increasing frequency. Defensive earthworks appear around cities that never needed them before. What I found in the archives of excavation reports from Dos Pillars, a mid-sized Maya city in Guatemala, is particularly striking. The city was attacked so repeatedly that its residents eventually dismantled their own temple staircases and used the carved stones to build defensive walls. The sacred became fortification. That is not a civilization in orderly decline. That is a civilization eating itself. The second record is the deforestation data. To build their cities, to fire the limestone plaster that coated every surface, and to fuel their population growth, the Maya cut down their forests on a massive scale. Pollen cores from lake beds across the region show a dramatic decline in tree pollen beginning around 700 AD, and a corresponding spike in dust and erosion indicators. What the Maya may have done, over centuries, was systematically destroy the very ecological system that made their agriculture possible. Drought didn't just arrive from the sky. In part, they may have created it themselves by stripping the watershed bare. And few who studied this connection early on lived long enough to see it accepted. The archaeologist who first proposed the deforestation collapse link in the 1970s was dismissed so thoroughly by colleagues that his work sat largely unread for decades. The third record is the most unsettling. Recent osteological analysis, the study of skeletal remains from multiple Maya burial sites, has revealed something that purely environmental collapse models cannot account for: signs of chronic malnutrition not just in the final decades of the cities, but going back generations before the collapse. Isotope analysis of bones from both elite and commoner burials shows that by 750 AD, even Mayan nobility were showing stress markers associated with nutritional deficiency. The system was failing long before anyone admits it should have been. What this suggests is not a sudden catastrophe. What it suggests is a civilization that had been structurally overstressed for over a century, by internal warfare, by ecological degradation, by agricultural systems pushed past their limits, and that drought was not the cause but the final weight placed on a structure already fracturing from within. And yet, the Maya did not disappear. This is what most retellings get wrong, the detail that, once you hear it, changes everything. When the cities emptied, the villages did not. Rural communities across the Yucatan, Belize, and the Guatemalan highlands continued. Trade persisted along coastal routes. The written language survived in modified form. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they did not find an empty jungle. They found millions of Maya people, still farming, still building, still speaking languages descended directly from the classic period. What collapsed was not the Maya civilization. What collapsed was the model of the state. The divine kings, the monumental cities, the centralized courts, that particular experiment in political organization reached the end of what it could sustain. And when it failed, the people adapted. They moved. They dissolved into smaller communities. They shed the apparatus of the state the way you'd shed a coat that had become too heavy to carry. That unfinished coronation stone in Copán, the one the stonemason left mid-chisel, it wasn't abandoned in panic. It may have been abandoned in exhaustion. The will to maintain the performance of kingship had simply run out. In the records I've kept across years of studying civilizational endings, what the Maya collapse teaches is a lesson that empires have refused to learn in every century since: the most dangerous collapse is not the one that arrives as invasion or earthquake. It's the one that grows quietly inside the walls, in depleted soil, in hungry bones, in wars that never quite end, until one morning, a stonemason sets down his chisel. And no one comes to pick it up. If this record deserves to stay open, subscribe. A new mystery surfaces every week.